So, welcome back everyone, or welcome back to our workshop participants, and also those that have joined us for the panel discussion. We'll get our panellists to come up and sit here in a second. I want to introduce you to the moderator of this panel discussion called Empathy Machines. For those who have joined us, I'm Jonathan Parsons, the Artistic Director of Experimenter. And the symposium today has been in partnership with ACMI, so a big thank you to them. And it's part of the public programs for Experimenter's latest exhibition. You can see the title there. If you haven't got to it already, it's at RMIT Gallery and will be on until November the 11th. And one of our panellists, Jane Gauntlett, has a fantastic work that's presented there. It's not available all the time, I should stress, so you need to make bookings, but go through the website and you'll see all the details for that. So, first up, we're going to introduce our moderator, Cossar, who is the Acting Artistic Director for the Melbourne International Film Festival. Al has been with MIFF for 7 festivals, and in his usual role as programmer, he works across film and VR. This festival approach is based around programming and delivering a diverse VR showcase, designing operational ways to deliver to audiences in collaboration with technical partners, and in general being motivated to make MIFF's audience experience on the virtual reality side a positive and engaging one. We'll have the panel discussion, which will run for about an hour, and then there's an opportunity for you to experience some of the artworks that are here for about an hour and a half after that. So Al will introduce the panelists, so please make Al very welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good afternoon, everyone. Have we got this on? Should be on. I think that might be enough. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Al Cossar, and welcome to Empathy Machines. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land we meet on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future. It's wonderful to have your company here today, as well as the company of some revered and incredible creative and critical minds with us, to take apart and put back together, observe, challenge, and get excited about the current expanse and future potential of VR and AR to move us beyond passivity as audiences towards forms of empathetic response, as well as delineate some of the myth-making and misthinking that often comes part and parcel with conversations around the nature of empathy itself, especially when applied to these technologies. As VR has returned to popular consciousness, as it has returned to popular visibility, to audiences in screening and performative settings, as it has entered the multi-billion-dollar scale of the consumer tech market over the last few years, much has been made, discussed, and dissected by some forms of purveyors, by journalists, tech moguls, film festivals, academics, as well as by public adapting to the properties of immersive storytelling, around the form's possibility to create new potential for empathy, for human connection and understanding, mapping and bridging difference, to enhance the power of our own capacity for self-reflection and imagination. All art, traditional and new, can be thought of as having a potential capacity to generate different qualities of appreciation for a subjectivity or subjective reality. But how is VR exceptional in its capacity to produce, specifically, empathy, or amplifying the forms of empathy generation we may see in other kinds of artwork, journalism, or public address? Can it indeed create profound levels of psychological impact and emotional change specific to its form, or has VR's potential been overstated or distorted or misunderstood in the landslide of marketing buzzwordery designed to pitch an emerging technology far and wide in different directions. There's firstly conjecture and conversation to be had in the idea of empathy itself, but I personally like Simon Mitchell's elegant notion of quoting Machine Hamid in a recent Senses of Cinema article with the idea that empathy is about finding echoes of another person in yourself. With this in mind, does VR truly resemble and conform to Christmas' much discussed notion of the empathy machine itself, also previous reference by Roger Ebert with regards to traditional film? Or is the reality of empathy and virtual reality closer to what others have dubbed a combination of ambition, hype, and hope, or something altogether more complicated? Are we in fact truly seeing the human scale of these technologies coming to the fore in unprecedented ways? In fact, artists have already responded to this question in work after work, putting forward an array of sophisticated, untoward, and interesting responses in mining the potential of this idea and creating new language within these forms. Multi-sensory immersive experiments, perspective swappings, the overlaying of performative and human elements to a virtual setting, and other forward-thinking uses of interactive qualities, as well as a developed sense of place and plausibility within cinematic VR and 360 video. So to set up the plan, we're here today to investigate the nature and potential of empathetic connection, to reflect on work and design created with empathetic effect, to think about where to next, to talk to the place of audiences in the equation, as well as the new social roles and responsibilities that the technology's empathetic qualities may open up for immersive content creators. We've got 60 minutes to solve all of these things. We'll give it a very hot go. And then there is always the ultimate and abiding, constant, familiar question, as others have put it, nagging, consistent, lurking in the wings of every public conversation ever about VR. And that is this in fact the technology that will ultimately make us more human? But to try to go beyond that today, how exactly? I'm thrilled to be joined here by some very special guests who are asked to join me up on stage now. Starting on my right, we have Damian Moratti. Damian is one of Australia's leading VR evangelists, holding an unwavering conviction that virtuality is going to fundamentally transform our world and augment every aspect of our lives. He's a tech entrepreneur with a lifelong passion for psychology and cognitive science. As the co-founder and CEO of Liminal VR, he's been a driving force in the development of a new product category of virtual experiences designed to induce and augment emotional and cognitive states. Next to him is Sarah Jane Woulahan. Sarah Jane is an award-winning director and cross-media auteur of drama, comedy, music video, documentary, and transmedia. Her films have screened at numerous film festivals, including South by Southwest, MIFF, Brisbane International Film Festival, Warsaw, and many others. She has directed ARIA and MTV-nominated music videos for artists including Silverchair, Missy Higgins, Tim Finn, and The Living End. Sarah Jane has created numerous multi-platform projects that integrate film, live performance, and online interaction, with her comedy series Fall and Gaze nominated for an AFI Award for Innovation. Sarah Jane is currently conducting research into the language of cinematic VR and her master's by creative practice at RMIT. Next to her, we have Emma Roberts. Emma Roberts worked as a producer and production manager across advertising, installation, web series, and short film before accidentally landing in VR and mixed reality in 2016. Along with director Ben Andrews, she has produced the mixed reality installations All the Stars They Bleed Together and The Moon Is Gone and the King Is Dead, which integrated multi-sensory VR inside multimodal exhibition space. In 2017, she consulted on VR for Channel 9, coordinated the VR Lab and Market for the AIDC, and co-facilitated various events as part of the Virtual Reality Content Creators Australia. Work on the projects, including the upcoming work Starlets for City of Melbourne and Melbourne User Week, is facilitated by a supported space at ACMI. I was interested to see in her online bio, she suggests to throw away your armchair, travel, and your empathy machines, that what she does is VR, but not as you know it. And then we have Jane Gauntlett. Jane is an esteemed writer, designer, and producer of interactive experiences. She has spent more than 10 years working in interactive theatre, film, and games. Her narrative-driven works explore the capacity for technology to intensify audience experience, pivoting at the intersection of experience, performance, multisensory immersion, documentary, and technology, aiming to provoke empathy and understanding in audiences. She writes that she's excited by a good story, by mind trickery, and by turning audiences into participants. She has an eclectic portfolio, working in the charity sector as a freelance creative producer and collaborating with other artists and organizations. having worked with the BBC, the Barbican, Columbia, and New York universities, and the US United Nations headquarters, to name just a few. She is the creator, of course, of the internationally recognized empathy project In My Shoes, an ever-expanding library of real-life stories recreated as experiences using the visceral impact of the senses in combination with technology, with a close focus on story and narrative. The series has included such experiences as working in the Slough, London, and Dancing with Myself. In My Shoes, Intimacy, which premiered at the highly respected Sheffield Doc Fest in 2017, is presented for you as part of Experimenter Make Sense. What an on-stage hive mind we have for you today. Please do join with me in making our guests welcome. So now you know a little bit about us. Conversely, we would like to know a little bit about you as well. Could I see by a show of hands? I'm making the broad, but I think pretty likely assumption that everyone in this room has experienced VR and AR technology. Is this the case? Yeah, lots of nodding. That's good. Can I also ask, just raise your hand if this is true, how many people here today have or are currently undertaking creating or producing a VR or AR work of their own? That's great as well. And can I ask how many people are currently studying virtual reality or augmented reality at a tertiary institute or similar? Thank you very much. It's great to get a sense from you. So very quick words of housekeeping. We have approximately an hour for today's panel. There will be a chance for your questions towards the end of the panel in about 10 to 15 minutes or so. For those of you who are into hashtags, there is one rule I'll encourage you to use throughout the panel, throughout the whole afternoon, for all your sort of tweeting needs. It is, some of you may have guessed this, hashtag Experimenter Makes Sense. Now, a researcher called Edwin Montoya-Zarilla talks about true empathy as driving a connection not only with a person's emotions, but also with the underlying circumstances of their lives. And this involves two things: an appreciation of the richness and complexity of someone else's life, alongside an appreciation of our distance from the ineffable otherness that another subject and another life represents for us. So when we speak to human connection and the acknowledgement of difference that is that idea, perhaps the best first step is to broadly take a step back and just put the question forward. This is to all of our panelists. What is it when we're talking about, when we use the term empathy? Importantly, what is empathy? Very importantly, what is it not?
So I think when we're talking about empathy, we probably should make understand the difference between empathy and compassion. So Paul Bloom, a psychologist from Yale, has recently released a book against empathy, basically making a strong point that, for example, if you are diagnosed with something terrible, you don't want your doctor to burst out into tears with you, right? You want the doctor to be compassionate and just to feel that the doctor's going to do everything he or she can to sort of help you. But there is a difference between empathy. Empathy is the, I guess, us taking on board someone else's emotions and feeling, putting ourselves in their shoes and feeling what they feel. So not, yes, I just think it's not good to make a comparison between empathy and compassion.
And Jane, I've heard you kind of talk similarly in a lecture when you were referencing Brené Brown and making the point that empathy fuels connection, whereas sympathy drives disconnection. Can you expand on that idea a little bit?
Yes, so empathy has very much become known as this new word, and my sex is just used so much. You mentioned it as a buzzword. Yeah, actually, sorry, I'm just going to break them. So empathy has become known as the E word in my circles because, is it not working?
No,
people shaking.
it is on, you just need to talk directly into it.
Like that?
Oh,
I put a green light.
yeah. In the meantime,
Testing.
now you talk right into it.
Okay,
Sorry.
I press the power
No, it's on.
So empathy has become known as the E word in my circles. I've done quite a few talks about empathy. And it's used so much as a buzzword, like you say. I think Brené Brown says, she does a really great short film that explains empathy. And if someone tells you something difficult that they're going through or something that's happened to them, Empathy is more that you say, I can't imagine what that's like. Why don't you tell me what that's like, tell me how I can help you. Whereas sympathy, people tend to do what they think they should do. So they like if I'm not feeling very well, I quite like a glass of vodka and some cake, but I don't necessarily assume that that's what someone else thinks. Okay, sorry, I got a bit thrown at the moment.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just find it really difficult because it is so overused, and I've been, I guess, researching all these politically motivated empathy films, and the Chris Milk, I guess, coming out and that sort of famous speech, the TED talk he gave, and then sort of watching the reaction after that, and now hearing those type of films being described as poverty porn, where essentially we're just becoming tourists who chuck on some goggles and we can, live the life of others, and it isn't really true, and it isn't really true understanding. And I probably come around to feeling a bit more like that, and it has a long way to go before it like generates true action or generates true emotional feeling. So it is a bit of a buzz word, I think.
I kind of feel like when we talk about, and when VR is talked about as a machine in particular, it's often, I think, quite reductive in what VR can be, and really focuses on a specific kind of outcome that you could basically, like you mentioned, Roger Ebert saying, film as an empathy machine, and you can look at various media as being able to portray another person's experience, and I don't think that's particular to VR at all, apart from the fact that it can often and is often used to put you in the middle of an experience, literally in your vision and in audio as well.
Yeah, which is what art, a lot of art, literature, what you get immersed, and feel empathy for characters or anything, but yeah, for the VR is pretty immersive.
I thought it might be interesting to ask a question, maybe this is one of yourself, Damian, about, I guess, not just individually defining what empathy is, but also talking about a general population's propensity for empathetic feeling and behavior, to talk about what kind of social context introducing technology like VR and AR kind of fits into in terms of its potential overall audience. In American context, a study around 2010-11 undertaken at the University of Michigan suggested there was an empathic decline through the first 10 years of the 2000s. US college students' empathic abilities had reduced 40% in a decade. It was hard to draw concrete conclusions as to why this was, but speculation around growing inequality in wealth, increasing rates of social isolation, people living alone, people less likely to join collective activities from sports teams through political organizations, as well as breeding rates themselves having dropped substantially and primarily in that college age group as well. Fast forward to 2017, it may be that we have a completely different context to consider in terms of proliferation and pervasiveness of connective systems and technology, social media, etc. Writing this last month for The Guardian, himself referencing pieces in the New York Times, Charlie Brinkhurst put forward that the emerging generation of millennials are increasingly characterizable as a hyper-empathetic generation, in which there is real emphasis on acknowledging the different struggles of different groups of people and a focus on ways to work together and make life better. I wanted to get your input as to what kind of social context you think exists for empathy today. How would you categorize the general population's propensity for empathy? How has this changed, or how is this changing?
Well, I think when we talk about empathy, it's important to also note that people empathise more with people like themselves, right? In the same groups, same demographics. So there's this really interesting study where they show people a hand that has a badly deformed, broken finger. And the negative reaction to, there's a whole bunch of different skin tones to that hand, and we react more severely to the skin tone that's more like ours, right? And so I think, talking about empathy in general, a lot of it has to do with social groups, whether it's, racial groups or other demographics, but there is this propensity for people to empathise more with people like themselves, and we see that in the news, right? So you might watch the ABC News, and the very first news article will be the pay helpline final Second will be there's an Australian who was murdered in Queensland. Third will be 50,000 Pakistanis died, right? And so you have this, this, I guess people do relate more to people that are more like them. So where VR is interesting, so I think VR can certainly help people empathize because of VR's, I would argue, unique capability to induce very strong emotions. So there was a Nielsen's neuroscience study, I believe it was last year, that found compared to 2D media, that VR elicited a 27% higher emotional response, and that emotional response lasted for around 34% longer. So what we have in VR is perhaps better suited to be called an emotion machine than an empathy machine in a lot of ways.
I think with what you were saying on that idea of like walking in someone else's shoes in VR in particular, I definitely do like get a lot out of the just kind of a rebuttal to that idea of empathy machine and walking in someone else's shoes, and that VR is less a walk in someone else's shoes and more a walk in your own shoes while using someone else's vision and audio. And I think unless you're embracing the capacity to induce emotion and make that like act on other people's nervous systems and their emotions and that sort of thing, to really embody them inside that experience, rather than just going, here it is, you look at it and you'll feel empathy from here. And I think that's where like your work really stands out, Jane, in being able to like use and embrace the mechanics of VR and the possibilities of incorporate physical space as well, and how to really involve people in that story so that they do feel connection rather than just kind of setting and leaving in a similar way to if you dumped a 360 camera in a refugee camp and every people and that sort of thing.
I was going to say, is it about the immersion? Because like obviously you're having all this sensory correlation, and so you're so immersed in the world that you might forget your own world, you can forget yourself.
And because we have such a pervasive second screen culture that even if we, if we're talking about traditional forms of art where we're watching a film on television, or we go to the cinema, or we're in a gallery and we're in a constant kind of brain state of distraction, then is it just, is a part and an element of that, just that singular perspective which is contained and harnessed when you are kind of immersed in experience as well.
Yeah, that's exactly why I was like so attracted to the because I was like trying the HSC vibe, and as soon as I put it on, the whole office just disappeared around the room. I was no longer aware of people, and it was just dumb games I was playing. I think, but I felt like I was in another land, and I thought, wow, imagine if because I love movies, I'm a total film nerd, but I'm still aware of myself, and I watched them in an audience, and I checked my phone. But when you're in that VR world, it's your reality, just people.
And I guess maybe it's a good time to talk about the idea of embodiment and the idea of being in someone else's shoes and kind of getting a sense of engaged presence rather than superficial perspective. And we've talked about sensory correlations, obviously, compounding and confounding the senses in combination to that end. And I'm interested to hear from all of our panelists, I guess, how you provoke emotional states through embodiment.
So there's a lot of stuff that you can do in VR in regards to embodiment. There's something called micro flexibility, where you can actually embody a non-human avatar. For example, you can control the body of a lobster, and actually get to use like 6 arms, right? But there's also cool stuff that you can do that's more abstract. Something called ambient sociability, where you can have, for example, an environment that's full of stars, but those stars represent someone else that's doing the same experience, in another place. So I think there are a lot of things that we can do in VR that are very novel, but also just building on the wealth of information that we already have, right? Like we've been, from music, for example, Beethoven and Wagner were deeply moving people in concert halls. So we're very, very lucky because we're able to build upon all of this rich tradition in the arts, and then take this really cool technology where we can completely hijack someone's consciousness and control everything that they see and hear and built upon that and had these really profound experiences.
Oh, I when I was watching your work before, that was really amazing to see the fan and all those elements, because that's not something I've never tried, but I did read about Erin Armstrong's work at Cannes, which obviously was, which everyone would know about, but one of the things that I was really impressed by was like you're meant to be in the desert crossing the border from Mexico to the US, and I think they made you have bare feet in the sand on the ground, and you envision helicopter flies overhead, but they've got fans that whip up the sand just as the helicopter goes over, so you have this real sense of really being there, and that seems really hard to pull off, like, but yeah, really deep in the experience.
And that's an amazing sense of granular detail, because I think you used the smell of urine as well, the train station within Wakefield and Slough, and yeah, just that kind of those kind of little tactile moments of like extraordinary.
Subtlety is very important when it comes to VR. It's important when it comes to anything. Embodiment is really important, I think, and sometimes people forget about perspective when they're making VR. So people will film something and meant to be seeing it from a human perspective, but it's filmed from down here or much further up, and it's really quite disorientating. I think the other thing that's really important is if you can see something, you should also be able to feel it. So back to the sound. If you're wearing a headset and everything's around you, when you reach out, you can't feel them. Immediately, the experience is broken. However, you can use abstract things, you can create sort of a dreamlike experience. There are ways around it, but it's something that I think needs to be paid a lot of attention to. It's about the experience as a whole, and any time you think could break that.
Could you talk a little bit maybe about your background in interactive theatre as well, and how that kind of informs how you see the place of empathy in your work?
Of course, so interactive theatre, I'm very much into making audiences protagonists, so the audience make their own experiences. It's really important that we think about everything. So we think about the design, we think about the experience from the moment they book the tickets, and we think about the fact that they can lose and be thrown out. We think about how we train the actors. But I think it really helps when making 360 films, because when you're doing that, you have to think about everything. You can't, when the camera's here and it's 360, it's filming absolutely everything. I think that's what makes it so different from flat screen. So I think my experience in working in interactive theatre really informs that. It's actually, I work with all the actors that I work with in interactive theatre because they're really well trained and experienced in responding very quickly. And it's
I guess back to the embodiment element, I suppose it's worthwhile acknowledging, at least in my perspective, there's different elements of embodiment within VR. And so one example that I like to whip out really often is a medical use of VR. There's a study done with burns victims who were put inside a headset which showed an icy environment. And I'm going to get this number wrong, but it's lessened, like, their pain, or what they registered as the pain they felt, is lessened by 60%. And I think that's a really incredibly powerful example of how just being inside that headset and how it tricks your senses can really embody you and alter the way that you perceive the world and perceive reality. And then I guess the other side of things is that multisensory aspect, which Ben and myself work in really almost exclusively. So we incorporate physical environments and designed exhibition space within our experiences, and those are designed to act and interact with what's going on in the headset. So it's things like multisensory aspects, but also the way that you can use VR as an audiovisual blindfold. So we did an experiment for City of Melbourne last year where people went into one space, and by the time they took their headset off, having journeyed through an alien planet, they emerged inside a completely different space. And I think that's something, the role of set and setting in VR and physical elements coming in to augment that virtual experience is an incredibly powerful one, and something that's starting to get picked up a lot internationally, but I don't see a lot here. And it's the same with mixed reality, but mixed reality is a bit of a muddy term, so a lot of people use it really differently. There's a saying in mixed reality that 1 + 1 = 3. In that you can add vision of a train going past and a little bit of breeze, and that comes together as a sum of its parts in a really powerful and impactful way. And we're constantly amazed by how in our work incorporating those physical elements can really change the way that people perceive their reality.
And what about, I guess the variance of audience response? Because you're trying to provoke a particular kind of response, but what kind of variance, what kind of range of reactions do you get from people?
Yeah. So I guess it is quite similar to immersive theatre in that sense, in that the participant, the immersive, is very much the active person in that experience. And so you have to, there's a lot of testing that goes on to try and figure out how people do act and interact in the spaces and really unexpected results that come out of that. And you also have to be able to, I guess, gauge for different people. Some things might be slightly more overwhelming. There's obviously elements of motion sickness as well and how people respond to that you need to be aware of. We do a lot of testing of our work and how extrasensory elements are experienced by a wide range of people, and that constantly surprises us. The different ways that different people, whether they're strangers or they're people we know really well, and we expect them to react one way and they react in a really different way. And there's something exciting in that, in not knowing and having a bit of a range in how people react to that sort of thing. But there's also an element of being able to, as you would in immersive theatre, guide people so that they're able to make their own decisions, but it's really subtly influenced by what you're doing in that. So we have people with multisensory stuff in particular, and sense a very interesting one, like light up like tiny children. And there was one experience we did where we were using earthy scents for a forest environment, and people would follow the scent. They would beam and they would follow the scent, but then they wouldn't realize that it had happened. And after the experience, we were doing exit interviews with everyone. And it was really common that people would not realize that scent had been a part of their experience, even though they reacted to it so strongly. And I find it really interesting in the way that people kind of
Unconscious.
Yeah, exactly.
And Sarah Jane, I wanted to ask about your interest in consciousness and I guess your research, because we were kind of talking before, and I think it fits in very well here about experiments in early cinema and results and emotional results.
Yeah, I was going to say the embodiment, like a lot of things we're talking about are physical embodiment, I guess, but one of the focus of my research is like mental embodiment, like the mind's eye. What is it? So if I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you, like in a 360 camera, it looks like this, but in my head I might be kind of flashing back to when I was talking on a panel and got really nervous, or there's another voice talking here, or what does it actually look and sound like? And if you were going to put that in a VR film, how could you represent what it looks and sounds like to be inside my head, I guess. Yeah, so I guess, and so what the research that I'm actually doing, so it's by practice, I'm going to make a short film that's a flatty, like a flat screen normal movie. And then I'm going to remake various scenes in it over and over and over and over and over again. So just, so like if it's a scene where it might be just, it's that autobiographical again, like the other film that I have made, but even if it's just me walking across the room, I'll do that with handheld camera, with tracking moves, so it really, I'm really technical film. And then sort of another bit that's embodiment, if I use overlay in a montage to represent memory, or if it's cutting in, or I cut from a subjective view to an objective view, embodied, non-embodied. And so just a really technical exercise because I'm totally coming from a film background, I'm not coming from art or theatre or anything. It's almost like I want to defend film's relation to VR or something. So yeah, so studying early cinema theorists and applying the kind of things that they did, like the visual experiments, testing with editing, and just doing something very kind of rigorous and scientific with repetition and to find out how you can represent the mind's eye better than cinema can. Because if you can't show if you're embodying and you can't show emotion, how can you show it from the inside, I guess?
And I think, Jane, that leads me to a pretty interesting, I think, take on your work, or something I find kind of fascinating about the kind of dynamic between yourself and your audience is that there's certainly autobiographical elements. You're asking people to empathize with your own personal story. And I was interested in that whether it creates any complications, whether you find because you're representing the work, the audience overstep the mark, they think they know you too well, or in ways that they, potentially don't. If that kind of dynamic gets distorted between artist and audience when you're talking about empathizing with your own story.
Yes. It's got me into trouble. The thing that when I made Dancing Myself, which was the 360 version of an epileptic seizure that I had, I was expecting it to just be at a pharmaceutical conference. I hadn't braced myself. It was a sponsored piece for that. I hadn't braced myself for Victoria Film Festivals, I think. But what I really liked about it was learning about the currency of storytelling and how I'd share a really personal experience, and then people would tell me their stories. There would be tears, there would be hugs, people would tell me about crimes they committed, they would tell me about all sorts of things. People having seizures, they'd ask me questions that I don't think they would have asked me if they hadn't seen it. One lady took off her headset, reached across the table, grabbed me and kissed me. That was quite fabulous. I think it does, there is an incredible connection sometimes between the audiences. And I think one of the biggest things has been that virtual reality reaches out to a very different audience to theatre and film. So it's meant that I've been able to show it to teenage boys, put them in my shoes and experience a seizure, and I don't know whether they would necessarily come along to see. That happened at Sheffield Rock Fest last year. And then Mum came in the next day because he'd gone back and raved about it. So it's that sort of connection that I really, really like, but it is exhausting. And actually, it does feel like a certain amount of responsibility. If you're putting someone in a vulnerable situation where they will share that sort of experience, it's quite a responsibility.
And that's an interesting question in general when you're talking about changing social roles and responsibilities of artists and creators for work which has emotional impact, which has empathetic kind of intention towards it. We're not in a research situation perhaps as creators where in a university you'd have an ethics committee and things would kind of go there. But if you're talking about the audience and setting boundaries on kind of what you think is appropriate, or if you're talking about exit interviews, or if you're talking about post-care after immersion, as the form of empathetic potential develops more and more, what are the new kind of responsibilities you think artists have to audiences?
I think it's pretty much the same as any other platform. I think people are really panicking a bit about VR. I might get into trouble for saying that. I might change my mind. But I think that as human beings, we all have responsibility with what we do and the information that we share. So I think it's very similar. Right.
I guess taking into account as well, just like how people do exit from your experiences, or how people are responding. The experience we did last year for Music Week, people came out a little bit shell-shocked, and it was like the space we were in didn't really accommodate for people to not just be chucked out into the real world again. Consequently, a lot of them worked outside the door. Very interesting, and wanting to talk about what they just experienced or process that in some ways. This is a very, a very experiential, experimental work. And so consequently for the work that we're gearing up to put on at the moment, because it is in a similar register, we did take into account that we'd like for people to be able to gather afterwards and gather themselves, rather than just going back on a train and that sort of thing. And I think when it comes to experiences that can be a bit intense or emotional or can really engage people, it's about being aware of how people do respond to that and making sure that whether you're an exhibitor or whether you're a creator, that there's some response to that rather than just putting in your hands of people as they take off their headset.
Don't artists want to provoke reaction? And you think about Mother, that was just on recently, that film, and everyone's like, it was like that kind of reaction that was too full on or too kind of weak, so I guess, yeah, but maybe because VR is the technology, we're worried that it's psychologically affected them differently than any of those art forms that novels have shocked and people have before.
Yeah, so looking at things in context, you have right now VR games that can be quite violent and scary. So I love watching, dodgy horror movies, right? It's a secret passion of mine. I've been completely desensitized to horror movies now. I can watch anything and it doesn't really bother me. If I go into VR and I'm playing like the Brookhaven experiment where I have zombies running after me every single time I play it and I shoot myself with it. It's terrifying. So I think what's important when we're creating experiences for the public is that people that are going to go into the experiences know within a certain threshold what the experience is going to be. So we created our first energy experience actually made 26% of people tense. And we weren't trying to do that, but that was, there was no violence in it. It was just about going up on a platform with a lot of sort of red, saturated red, because saturated colours are lively laser sounds. And what we ended up doing is just reducing the saturation of the red, making more of an orangey colour, changing the audio a little bit. So even in a fairly abstract experience without a solid narrative, just the audio-visual components of it made some people tense. But that was taken. And the people that were tense, half an hour later, they all became cheerful, which is another thing. But as long as people know what they're getting into, as long as we don't put someone into a zombie experience and not tell them about it, which I've done to my wife, where I think that's what the responsibility is.
I get the question a lot when I put someone in a headset for the first time, and they're like, "You're not going to, nothing's going to jump out and grab me. You're not going to jump out and grab me, are you?" And I think people are a bit hesitant because it is that blindfold and you're giving away your senses to someone else. There's an element of that as well. It's more vulnerable, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the idea of gun being pointed at your forehead within an immersive experience versus watching it on a cinema screen, or what those sort of elements kind of do to you, and I guess the potential for desensitization if you're talking about VR as a platform for combat training or those kinds of applications as well. And Damian, I'm interested to hear more about your platform in terms of how it works and what the intentions are in terms of enabling its users to choose their emotional states within a VR setting.
Yeah. So, I guess about 3 years ago when I started with Nick, we realised intuitively that VR had this potential to have these enormously powerful psychological outcomes in people. And we worked that out pretty early on with some rapid prototyping. And then as the company grew and we did more and more R&D, we actually realised that it's relatively simple to evoke these strong emotional responses if you know what helps them lead it to talk. So you want to calm somebody down, you control the breathing, you reduce the tempo of the music over time, you slow down movement over time, you use soft round shapes, and you reliably calm people down. You want to energize people, you use very saturated colours, you increase the tempo of the music over time, make things move faster, you have interactive. So once we kind of worked that out, we decided, well, instead of building all these experiences ourselves and sort of building this platform just with our IP, what if we made our research available to the wider deaf community, the ones that have a go at building these types of experiences too? So at VRLA this year, we launched our partnership program, and since then we've had 32 teams from around the world sign up to access our research and build these types of experiences. So now it's really exciting. So we're working with these people all around the world, helping them build experiences that either calm people down or energize them, and we'll be launching a platform early next year. Yeah, so our aesthetic is a very, I guess, abstract, non-representational aesthetic. We really wanted to push the limits of abstraction and take a bit of a reductionist view and see what we could do with that. However, we don't enforce that aesthetic, so our partners can use any aesthetic that they like. Where we do focus on bottom-up processes, so it's not like for the calming experiences, they're not guided meditations, they're just audio-visual experiences that directly induce feelings of calm, and which is the opposite.
We are almost at that time already. It has flown by. We have about 15 minutes left. So at this point, I'd love to open to the floor for any audience questions. Just raise your hand. You have one. At the back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the great talks. I just want to ask about general question about empathy, because I think the identification of projection and empathy is quite different. But like main difference I feel like is self-notice or self-reflection. But in VR, we disconnect from our body and also we just kind of engage in it. So how can we differentiate it between like identification, projection, or like empathy in VR? Because sometimes blind identification can be worse, so that's why the Brayton kind of approach like distancing the back and like contemporary art, that kind of thing. So how do you guys have some kind of techniques for like relaxing also critical awareness as well as empathy or identification, and also how can we separate it from like how can we perceive our body in VR?
Let's start. I think one thing that I find consistently interesting about the way that people talk about VR experiences that they've had is that, and that is different to other media, is that people use the first person. I did this, I was on a train, I was talking to this person, I felt this, I did this, and that becomes very blurred. So people are talking about these experiences that they've had, they speak about what the character, the camera, the whatever it is that you're following, whose perspective you're following in VR as them, but they also add in their own feelings on top of that as them themselves, and it becomes very entangled, and I don't know if I have an answer about how you can reliably distinguish those, but I find it an incredibly interesting melange of how, a demonstration of how people experience VR and how it does kind of blend a little bit with your body, with that other body or lack of body that you have in VR as well.
I just had a thought about one thing I've been looking at is like obviously live action versus animated VR. So there's a lot more potential to do in animation because of processing power. So but if we think about projecting forward with live action, when that can be truly interactive, that's going to be really interesting because you have that embodied view, you have more realism because it's captured as in the world. But then also you are more likely to feel embodied when you influence the world that you're in. And there is some sort of experiments that are around like, I think you mentioned Blackout, is that movie? Yeah, so that's one where you can walk through a train, and because they're using volumetric 3D filmmaking, you can, it looks pretty lo-fi but at this stage, but you can walk around the people and they speak to you in that environment. So when there's more interactivity, it's more immersion, more empathy, maybe.
Yeah, and with Blackout specifically, that I think they were voluntarily scanning people on site. So as the exhibit kind of progressed, the thoughts and the people progressed, and it was sort of seen as almost like a This American Life kind of take. It wasn't, yeah, and kind of developing. I think we see it another question.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if or how you felt from empathy when you, I suppose, that we are, if you think, I suppose, it's going to adapt for those who don't have sight, so from an accessibility point of view. Accessibility is a real issue with VR. Accessibility is a real issue in general. It's something I'm exploring, but I think something that's really important is to remember the audio side of things and how powerful audio can be. And some amazing directional audio technology, some amazing 360 audio technology. And I think that in my research into making things more accessible, it's really thought home the impact of that and how we should put a lot of time and effort into that. I think when I'm making work, I try and make it so that they stand alone as something that would be visually rewarding and also audibly rewarding, so that, yeah, you might have the experience of on the board. Sorry, my words are a bit jumbled. Can I blame jet lag?
I think on the topic of sight in particular, notes on blindness remains for me one of the most incredible demonstrations of how to tell stories and how to connect with a character inside VR. It is representations inside VR, using VR of theologian John Hull, I want to say, and his diaries as he and experiences of going blind. And the way that, I guess it's, for me, a really fantastic demonstration of how audio can be used completely aside from visuals, because a lot of the time it works, the way its mechanics work are in taking visuals away from you and just having you rely on audio in that space. It does still include visual elements, but I think it's a great demonstration in a narrative sense. If you're looking at existing work of how strong and powerful a storytelling tool in 360 spatial audio can be.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like there's more potential to be creative in sound than there is in vision for me in live action, because that's why I'm interested in doing that study, because it's pretty boring. Just doing like one video shot, to be honest. In live action, not in an animated world, it's totally different, but sound sort of all creativity, that's really great space seems to be.
Just touching on the power of audio as well and music, something that I was made aware of this week from Eduardo and research is that it's amazing that some emotions like sadness, people actually enjoy having music that makes them sad. So we don't want to be sad in real life because it sucks. But there's something about music and their ability to induce these really profound emotions, and also almost a synesthesia as well with the sadness and melancholy and happiness, and it's really interesting. I think music and audio are a huge part of the art in general.
This quickly about empathy. I remember this a scientific study where they had a monkey measuring its brainwaves, and they were feeding the banana, for instance, and it had a certain response, and then they saw someone else eating a monkey and had the same response, and then sort of developed this idea of neurons. So what is perceived is actually represented inside, and I guess we have that to a certain extent. But in terms of actually, I guess talking about creating a shared experience. I was just wondering, do you think it's possible to affect everyone equally? I mean, in terms of performance arts, for instance, ideally you want one in a shared state of emotion, and where they're actually not even conscious of themselves, but they're just conscious of the actual experience. But and if there's like do you believe in like a sort of a universal archetypal creative language which allows people to experience that, or can we bypass our perceptual filters and the like, or your thoughts on that?
But I guess this is about a language, I guess, because we talk about cinema having a language, and a certain shot combination or use of audio in a certain style elicits a specific effect in audiences, and it's about 100 years of history, so it's developed that. So similarly in VR, it's not like each people are individuals, of course, it's going to be different, but we'll develop this kind of language or tools that guys understand the meaning better. That's good.
And yeah, when we're screening VR works at MIFF this year, it's very technical partners working on the playground to build a synchronous platform for us. So we basically use a cinema with a circular layout with 8 people and swivel chairs. But we also have a platform at the back which allows us to monitor all the headsets simultaneously to see people's perspective and how they are flitting around kind of comparative to each other. So we can kind of follow where that kind of, I guess, shared coalition kind of perspective is happening. We find it's really interesting to try and take those elements which we find in traditional kind of film screenings of built-in community through congregating people, through kind of showing artists and that kind of a thing, as a bit of an airlock at the start and at the end. So we want to try to create those situations where there's still human connection around the immersion and leaving the experience to build those elements a little bit.
Thanks for the discussion. There's been a lot of talk about the use of, I guess, the real space and the virtual here, so the two or three, artists even that kind of do work within the VR often incorporate kind of extrasensory or proprioceptive kind of methods. Is there some development where you could see a lot of those works being consumed just within the kind of private space of the home, in the same way that film obviously is moved primarily out of, say, the cinema, which is this larger kind of congregated space, to something that you just watch at home on the television that kind of leads a similar kind of set of responses? Do you think that VR has that capacity as well, or does it always kind of require, sand to be on the floor and fans go and that kind of thing?
I guess, like in the way I'm working at the moment, the way we're thinking about it is, okay, we're based on projection of where VR is going. It's becoming more and more taken up in the home. You can get your headset, you can download, there's a wide variety of excellent content out there that you can experience from your lounge room. And I guess for us, it's about creating VR as an event. And why would you go to your lounge room to do an experience? What elements can you create? What is VR theatre? What gets you off the couch, out of your HTC that you have at home? There's two sides to that. I guess, just what we found in our work, one side is just engagement full stop. There's not a lot of accessibility for VR at the moment, unless you want to spring a couple of grand on a headset and a computer for a high-end VR, or even if you just have an iPhone and you don't have an Android phone that you can buy a cheap headset, a cheap Samsung Gear for. And so there's a lot of curiosity in people who want to access VR but can't. And when you create VR in these event-like settings, people flock to it, and different kinds of people as well. You hear about VR being offered early adopters, so males 25 to 35, and that is not the case when you're putting it on in public. It's almost universally, everyone I've spoken about who's done VR, I've spoken to who's done VR in a public setting, it's been a pretty even gender split. In our events, it's almost majority of the time the women who are buying the tickets. If it's a man and a woman, experiencing the thing together, who bought tickets together. Aside from the emotional labour side of that, I think that does speak to, and just looking at the audience today as well, like a broad interest from demographics that aren't the key demographics for buying a headset and having it at home. And then the other side of it is, what else can you give to people that they can't access, or may not have accessed, or may not have tried before as well. And I find that space really interesting, and just a fun little playground for fucking with people, essentially.
There has always been there's 4D cinema, like 4D cinema shares, and there's been melodrama and all those kind of things existed, but I didn't really know about them until I was researching.
Yeah, tingler all over the castle. Yeah. I think we've got time for one more question.
I was wondering what you thought about the importance or use of empathy as almost a trait that kind of bolsters VR or video game experience into like a high art form or kind of art piece over, I guess, the lower, more cultural sphere that video games and VR are often lower to, and is that an issue?
I was wondering what you thought about the importance of. I think one of the big things I noticed about VR is that people don't necessarily write reviews about it. I haven't found very many reviews about VR, and that's a real issue for me. Being a theatre maker, when I make something, I'm ready to be ready to be slated. Basically, like putting something out there is like lying down and waiting to be kicked. And I think that plays quite a large part in how seriously it's taken. And also how much personal work we get. I kind of want that sort of honesty back with any other art platform. That's not really answering your question very well, but I just think that it's still seen as, it's still not quite accepted in any circles.
I think just on the game side of things, when I think of games that have really impressed me, and even like VR content that has been critically acclaimed in whatever circles that may be, and often that's not the traditional circles for reviewing or that sort of thing. It might be a tech audience or just dedicated VR audiences as well. Often the thing that does tend to elevate or rise above people tend to connect to is not so much the empathy thing. That definitely does play in, that you have experiences that are designed to be empathetic. But I think the mechanical side of things and the way that that can alter your experience also is a factor. So games like, I haven't played video games for a very long time, so I'm going to use some very dated examples. I'm so sorry, but the Metal Gear series, which often used the mechanics of how you play a video game to incorporate different ways of playing. There's a boss battle that you do with a psychic character, and he can tell everything that you're going to do before you do it because he's a video game character and they have that input. So the way that you defeat him is you unplug your controller and you put it in another plug, and then he can't read you anymore. And that's like there's other like boss battles where if you save and turn off and you leave it for 2 weeks, you come back and the boss was so old that he died. Which is really interesting and constantly like brought up when you talk, and games are still evolving as a medium that's taken seriously, but when in the circles where games are taken seriously, constantly referred to as really interesting examples of how the mechanics of game can be incorporated into an experience. And I think a lot of VR has that as well. You see how people go, I love the way that they use gaze control in this. I love the way that they took away vision in this. I love the way that, for Jane's work, I love the one that we're about to show, how intimacy makes you look at your partner even though you can't see each other. And so there's that performative aspect of it, and that's a mechanical part of it. And, yeah. Sorry, that was a random. What was that game? Metal Gear Solid. It's a series.
I think we're going to have to wrap up there so we can start some of the demos. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for coming. Please join with me in thanking all of our guest speakers. Thank you so much for
Thank you.